What's the secret to leading and engaging four generations of diverse humans within your team and your organization? This is exactly the leadership litmus test that we dig into on today's episode. I'm joined by generational researcher and author Meghan Grace, who's going to distill a decade of data and practical insights into helping you learn to speak four generational languages to spark shared purpose, keep engagement high, especially when generational expectations and motivations are dramatically different. So get ready to explore the mindsets, communication pivots, and trust building habits that turn intergenerational teams into an outstanding high performance engine. Welcome to the Working Well podcast, the show that explores the critical intersection of leadership, business strategy, and sustainable human performance, and how those things are defining the future of work. I'm your host, Tim Borys. Welcome to the show, Meghan. It's so great to see you again after our previous call, and I'm so excited to start talking about the different generations in the workforce. We hear that a lot these days. Before we dive in, I'd love to can you give the audience a little bit of a 30-second summary of how you got to be here and why this is such a passionate topic for you?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tim. And hi, everyone listening. My name is Meghan Grace. I'm a generational researcher and translator. I don't know if it's translator would be the right word, but really, I do a lot of work with my co-author, Dr. Corey C. Miller, and research partner in understanding how generations are shaped and then how they navigate different environments of our lives. And so we had started this journey in 2014, really in trying to understand Gen Z as a cohort as they were entering higher education, and then kind of followed them as they grew up, and now they're really squarely in the workplace and they're navigating the workplace with four other generations. So we felt it was a really good time to think about, what does the modern workplace look like, and how does a generational cohort have a different experience given the landscape that we're all navigating right now. And it's not that we're ditching Gen Z, but we're kind of folding more generations into the mix in our current work and trying to think more about how we can work better together and how we can collaborate better, while also honoring and understanding the different strengths that generations bring, and how they help us actually better teams.
Fantastic. Oh, I know there's so much we're going to talk about, and I know we've got a lot to cover. But as I was researching for this episode, I came across a Pew research paper that had mentioned that generational labels are often misused without, they said, controlling for age and life stage. So,
Mhm.
how do you decide when it's when a generational lens adds insight versus really taking away from or just adding noise to the equation?
Mhm. So that's where I like to use. I do a lot of work in higher education, and so I use like the idea of like, is this just a 19-year-old brain being a 19-year-old brain, or is this something generationally specific? And that's the difference between what the Pew Research Center is referring to, which is the life cycle effect, and then the element of a cohort effect. So you can apply that same thing of like Gen Xers who are pretty like middle aged, preparing for retirement. Are they being people in their middle age? Or is this something that's Gen X specific? Or you could apply that to baby boomers of life stage. So there's just certain things that are human development and how we age as people and progress through society. When it's a generational element of it, we specifically look at what occurred during the formative years of a generational cohort and how that's manifesting in different types of motivation, different behaviors, different ways that they're navigating society in their personal interactions with others. And so I always say, like, let's look at the Gumby years when your brain is really flexible between like 16 to 24, when really what's happening is your frontal cortex is developing and you're understanding who you are, how you interact with other people, how you build relationships, how you have a sense of autonomy that's not related to what your parents tell you what to do, and how you become your own person. And that really happens a lot of times when a group of people is entering into adolescence and young adulthood, and they're moving into spaces like higher education, post-secondary education, or into the workforce. And so that's, we think about what's going on in those years to think how it's shaping the 19-year-old brain, and how today's world is very, very different than, let's say, 100 years ago. But there's some things that humans, no matter the generation or the decade they were born into, have some general things they need to do. at that life stage. And so it's a really good, I like to use the test of, is this typical for someone's life stage development regardless of the year? Or is this something that's a response to what's going on right now, or something that could have occurred when this person was in those really formative years of young adulthood?
Mhm.
And that's where you can determine the difference between typical life stage stuff and, oh, this is generationally specific.
Okay. And as a researcher, you're very data focused.
Mhm.
What story is the data telling you right now about multi-generational workforces in 2025?
Yeah. So what we see is when we look at generations in the workforce, that the really early years of a career or career planning, right around that time of, let's just say, 18 to 24, really has an impact on how people look at work and navigate work for the rest of their life. And so we can take like the world that the baby boomers lived in when they were 18 to 24 was very different in like how they worked, how they got their jobs, what they worried about, how they were motivated, and then the relationship with an organization or an institution was different for baby boomers than it is for some of today's younger generation. So one that comes up a lot in the workplace is loyalty, and saying like, oh, well, young people today are not loyal to their employers. And we kind of push back on that and say, well, are employers all that loyal anymore to their employees?
Yeah.
Because in past generations, there was a thing called a pension plan. There was the promise of Social Security. There was this idea that um, employers needed to really work to keep good people there. And now it's kind of like this churning cycle. And so it's really in the years between 18 and 24, we're really developing just a sense of how the world works and how we want to be a part of it, and how that's going to impact what we want to do for work, how we want to spend our time, how work is going to be a part of our identity or not, and our relationship with leadership and authority. All that's occurring, and we're just kind of like, teenagers being teenagers.
Yeah, and you use a story about pension or the example about pensions, and Toyota had what employment for life at
Hmm.
one point, and yeah, people would spend their entire career with one company. I love how you reframed it as, do employers have that commitment to employees? Because in many cases, no. As soon as their quarterly results need to be met, layoffs happen,
Hmm.
and we wonder why people don't have loyalty to the organization.
And they see a lot of it of industry wide as well, that like they might themselves not be laid off, but the company down the street in the same industry just laid off however 25% of their workforce, right? And so they think, oh, it's coming for me next. And when you're a more junior employee or a younger employee, you might not have been there. There's I think a really fair fear that sits in someone's mind of like, I've had less time at this place to show my value. I'm doing my best, but I don't have the benefit of tenure in this space. So there's a good chance that like my job's not promised. And I think younger generations look at both work and life of like, tomorrow's not promised, so I have to find the best option so that I can have a good experience for the life I'm living today.
Yeah, one thing that comes up a lot in my coaching with clients is the pace of change and
Mhm.
adaptability. How do you see that fitting into the generational dynamic within the workforce?
So I sat on a panel once with a wonderful professor from Stanford, and she explained how, and I got to attribute this to her, we as a society are actually moving through change faster, like at a faster pace than we ever have. So like society and the world has always changed. Like we've always evolved, we've always grown. But our advancements and evolution of our society is like a constant cycle. You look back on history and you're like, yeah, like someone invented the wheel, and then we like hung out with that wheel for a little bit of time. Now it's like we made a wheel and then we did it something the next day and it was different. And the next day and the next day. And so the adaptability and the evolution of what feels like a constant state of change is very, I think, marked for a little bit more for our younger generations of, when your brain is younger, no shade to older people, we just welcome change and adoption and getting out of our comfort zone a lot more. And so for millennials and Gen Z, they've always been in a space where there's just a very rapid rate of change and things moved faster. as they were growing up. And I don't fault older generations for being like, everything's changing so fast, because in our deepest sense, humans love stasis. We love a comfort zone. We're like animals who love a comfort zone. So it is disorienting to go through that moment of saying everything's changing and it won't stop changing.
Yeah.
And to develop a sense of frustration that is placed towards other people, but not really in this idea of maybe we're having a little bit of that frustration because we can't control the rate of change that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah, I was co-facilitating a workshop on the future of leadership, and we had quite a range of ages and generations within the team, but or within the group. Colleague had said, she's like, as much as you may think that how fast change is happening right now, this is the slowest pace of change you will experience moving forward. So
Mhm.
embrace it because it's only going to accelerate from here. And it was interesting to see how the room responded to that question, because most people haven't heard it in that sense. They're always just it's so busy and things are changing. It's like this is the slowest it's going to be moving forward. So either you're on board with that or you're not,
Mhm.
but that's your choice.
Yeah, and it is a choice, because it's also, I think some people feel like when things change, they have to go along with the change, right? We could get into a whole conversation around change management, but there's also some aspects of our society that like you don't have to opt into the things that are changing, right? Like you don't have to, if you feel like everything's busy, 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 busy all the time, you don't have to live your life at breakneck speed. And that's an interesting thing that I think about for especially Gen Z. They've grown up in it, but they're also in this like counterculture moment where they're like, the world is really busy and I got to protect my peace, and pushing back. And millennials are like, the world is really busy, but I have to stay on top of it because if I don't, I won't get ahead.
Yeah.
And like that's why we're seeing a really significant amount of burnout with millennials. And Gen Z seeing that and they're like, I'm just not going to be about that. Like I'm going to do my best at work, but I'm also gonna not going to make work and everything I do at my job core to my identity. And I need to protect my peace to some degree. And I think that's a really healthy thing,
Yeah.
that they're recognizing the world changes fast, but they don't have to opt in to every pressure to like be on the bullet train of change.
Absolutely. And I get behind that 1,000%. My background's health and well-being and human performance. And that's what got me into corporate coaching and consulting was the amount of burnout and the
Hmm.
disengagement and the lack of performance in teams and individuals is shocking. And
Hmm.
sometimes I wonder how companies are even functioning at this point.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing is like I'll sit and talk with one of my friends. Like I do a lot of independent consulting, one stop, or like I'm a one person shop, or might work with one or two people depending on a project. And then I've got a good friend and former boss and colleague that works for a really large consulting firm. And we talk about how like our problems are not that different. She's got a team of 100. I've got a team of like 2 to 3, and our problems are still the same. Right. So like there's no company that's perfect, and there's no company that's not plagued by like a problem.
And so I love that we've been talking a lot about change and how rapidly it's going, but a topic that comes up a lot these days is belonging. And so
Hmm.
when we think about the universal human drivers of motivation and belonging is one of them. What other universal human drivers have you found that leaders can anchor on to not just tailor to a specific generation, but across the board to all people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that we're coming to like, where's the place where we're all the same, right? Because I think when we're in a place of sameness, we can at least sprinkle in the idea of how do we build like a good relationship with someone. It's really easy to build a good relationship with someone when you have something in common, right? And in our research that we did a study across the 4 different generations that are predominantly in the workplace. And we asked like, why do you work and what's important to your workplace? And there was usually about 2 to 3 things in each of those categories that were consistently ranking at the top. So we can really confidently say that these are things that people who are working care about and want. And those things included pay. Obviously, we live in a world where you got to pay bills. So people want to be paid, but there's a stronger influence of things like meaningful work and using one's skills and finding purpose in their work, that is going to drive retention and talent management more than just pay. Because like there's always going to be someone that can pay you more. But is it a place where you feel valued is a big one. The other things that were really important were trust. And so you talk about belonging. Belonging is like deeper than just feeling included, because a really core element of belonging is the fact that you can feel safe around the people that you're with and that you can trust them. It's like the concept of feeling at home is you can be yourself, your silly self, your professional self, whatever that is. But like to feel a sense of belonging in an environment is, can I feel safe and do I trust the people in the environment around me? And so people, regardless of generation, they want to know that they can trust the people that they're working with, their bosses, their peers, the people that report to them. Trust is such a huge thing that people overlook, and they think it's just an immediate, you're going to get it because I said so and I'm the boss. You have to trust me. And trust is like a deep interpersonal connection that a lot of people just try to skip right over,
Mhm.
and they expect it. And they don't realize how big of a two-way street it is.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is trust and psychological safety are a foundation for belonging.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And everybody wants that. Like, I think when people overcomplicate humans, like we get really like in our head, you do this for your work, right? We get really in our heads. And I try to remind people that at the end of the day, we are really fancy animals, and
Yes.
we're very fancy pack animals. So we like when we feel connected and we can trust the people we're around. We also like to feel safe, and we love stasis because dissonance and change is scary, and not being able to trust the people around you is scary. Like that's why we still have a flight or flight instinct embedded in us. It's still in there because at the end of the day, we're fancy animals.
Yeah.
And so we just have to understand at that really simple level of like what humans need to even go to that next level of performance, connection, being a good family member. When those things aren't there, it's really hard for humans to move past that.
Yeah, I love that. And the fancy animals. It's the first time I've heard it in
Fanciest.
said in that way, and I love it. Yeah.
The fanciest. And I came around to that because like I've got a dog and we've had him since he was a puppy. But when we were training him and bringing him home, a lot of like any puppy training books are going to be like, what do you think your dog needs in this time? I'm like, I don't know. He can't tell me. But then it's understanding like at the end of the day, what a dog needs is like a social outlet, food, water, entertainment, like a walk, a potty break, like going through and making sure that all of his needs were met. And I think that people overlook the fact that like humans as fancy animals, we still have needs,
Mhm.
and we don't meet them. We can't do the next level thing.
Yeah. To switch topics a little bit, we've talked about the different generations in the workforce, and each one of those has their generational identity, we'll call it. So, how do we balance the tension between honoring that generational identity while avoiding stereotypes that can sort of box people in, or I guess the negative aspect of stereotyping?
So stereotypes, I think, are they get stereotypes in themselves get a stereotype. They get a bad rap. Stereotypes are just things that are like repeated, like it's a repeated observation of a trend. So like, but it's to a point where we start to make fun of it, if that makes sense. And so stereotypes, when they are fun and jokey, like, haha, millennials love avocado toast, right? Like that's whatever we do. We enjoy
I'm not a
it. Like
millennial
it's a
and I
well
love
balanced.
avocado toast. So,
It's a well balanced snack, you know. But I think when you start to use it as a way to describe someone's like flaws is when it starts to get into a space that like makes me, I call it generational slander, which I don't tolerate. But I think that we can use a generational identity to your question, this idea that we can see other generations and recognize that their perspective is going to be different than ours. And that is completely okay. That a baby boomer's viewpoint on the world is going to be different than mine because they interacted with a world in their upbringing that's just so vastly different than the world was when I was growing up. And so the powerful thing that we can do is, as leaders and people that work with others, is recognizing that this person's coming at it from a different vantage point, and that's not something that you can control, but it is something that you can do your best to learn. And so not boxing people into these categories, but doing empathetic listening to understand their perspective, because that's where you start to understand the different strengths that different generations bring into this and different ways that those different viewpoints they're actually an asset. And so with every negative stereotype, I think there's like some kernel of truth to it, and we have to really get to the, well, where's the deeper rooted motivation in that coming from, and not saying, well, my goodness, they're doing it differently, so stereotype bad. It's just like the recognition they're doing it differently, and it's probably because they bring a different vantage point to this environment and this experience.
Yeah, and that I think you bring up a great point that often gets overlooked is what people we're all right now in this moment the sum of all the experiences that we've had in our life, and
Hmm.
everyone comes from a different background, a different experience, even within the same generational cohort, but particularly between cohorts. You think of,
Hmm.
the baby boomer generation versus Gen Z. Like, even at the
Hmm.
same life stage, the experiences are off the charts different. So they will,
Hmm.
of course, have different perspectives and viewpoints on the world. And I think as leaders, and I know I've lost sight of that at times when leading teams, and find it's good to somehow come back to that and remember, okay, can I look through that lens and see
Hmm.
some glimpse of what they may be seeing and understand that it's going to be different from my perspective.
I think it's the, can I look through that lens, but am I willing to be vulnerable enough to admit what I don't know and ask someone in a way that's like respectful?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, like, that's where God bless them, older generations just don't want to do that. As we get older, we crave the stasis more. It's like our brains decide we're done with that rate of change and we just want to chill. And that's fine to some degree, but we get into that really sticky part of not being vulnerable enough to say, I don't know what I don't know about your perspective, but I'm willing to learn. Where oftentimes we get to the point of saying, I don't understand why you're being so different, you young person. So I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
And then we try to figure out, like, okay, well, why is there such a disconnect between different generations? And everyone else will be like, well, older generations, like, but the younger generations need to be catering to me. And I'm like, well, technically they don't. They can just opt out of like not working for you.
Yeah.
And as leaders, I am a firm believer that it is your responsibility to role model effective behavior, and it's your responsibility to put in a little extra interpersonal effort to showcase the kind of positive behaviors that we hope to see. So if we want empathetic leaders who engage in good listening for better teams, they have to be the ones that start that. You can't just be like, I'm unwilling to understand your perspective and I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, and how much of that is going back to what we talked about before, the generational difference or the life stage where people just get caught in their rut, or they've been in a routine for so long that they're on
Mhm.
autopilot and they're not even thinking that.
Yeah, I when I get really cheeky with groups that I work with, I'm like, if your frontal cortex has been locked in the longest, you have the most responsibility to try to learn about other people because your brain has been pretty solid longer, and your sense of safety and like well-being has been uh, firmed up a little bit longer than other people. So they don't like when I say that, but I'm like, that is the burden of wisdom, is that you have more experience, and so your sense of stasis is stronger, and that's where we have to, it's hard to break out of it, but I think that if you have a more solid foundation of who you are because you've been in your brain for longer, you should be the one that role models what that means to take perspective of others.
I You're preaching to the converted. I've
I know it. I'm like, that's why we're doing this, so other people hear it.
Exactly, exactly. Now, one of the questions you probably get a lot is how do you manage the conflict between different generations in the workplace? I want to flip that around and say, from a research standpoint, what practices have you seen that most quickly build trust in cross generational teams? And I guess on the flip side, which ones erode it?
Ooh, I think expectation setting and transparency is one of the bigger ones that gets overlooked. But identifying that expectation setting and transparency is a two-way street. So again, those two things are really critical to, if we go back to that element of trust. Trust is really defined and characterized by following through on what you said you're going to do. and doing that consistently. And so when you set expectations with transparency and you make it a two-way street, it's almost like two people or a group of people are going into an agreement with one another that says, we expect this of one another and we will commit to doing this. And when we consistently do that, we will have trust in working together. The unspokenness sometimes of expectations is what I think people get into. They get into hot water with it because they're like, well, didn't you, older generations will be like, but didn't this intern or younger team member know that this is an expectation? And how do they not know that? How dare they not know that? And I'm like, did you explicitly say that? Or is this an unspoken cultural practice that you're expecting them to know? That's like expecting someone to speak a language in a country that they did not grow up in and no one spent time teaching them. And then you're faulting them for it. So it's one of those things where I'm kind of like, shared expectations that are a two-way street and leading with really proactive transparency benefits everyone and brings everyone together, in my opinion.
Yeah, from a coaching standpoint, that's a key topic of conversation is clarity of communication, setting expectations, and I guess the follow-up and repetition of those expectations over time. Saying it once, even if you said it very clearly, isn't enough.
Hmm.
Think if, what the marketing says, 7 to 15 times you have to see something before a message connects,
Hmm.
and people are bombarded with information overload all day, every day. So one even clearly said thing is going to just get lost in the noise. Yet when we look at it, a lot of leaders aren't actually even communicating that one time clearly.
Yeah. Well, and I think back to when I was responsible for kind of like chief of staff duties and when we had to onboard new team members. Um, our old training model was just like for the first 3 weeks, you're just going to get talked at, and we're going to tell you everything under the sun, and then we're going to be like, good luck out there. And then we're never come back to it. And so I actually took it and I elongated it. And then I broke up because, especially, we were onboarding some newer talent, younger talent, and making sure that we were spending the appropriate time that's going to allow a brain to take in all the distance of a new job while also being like, this potentially is my first big kid job ever. And I'm trying to figure out culturally what it even means to be a full time professional on top of all of your policies, all of your procedures, and the 15 things you would like me to get done by the end of this week.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And it's taking the approach of not just saying it once, but following it back up, making it digestible. Again, I think that it's making things a two-way street and not just to let me brain dump a bunch of things on you and expect you to just like get it right away and then get mad when you don't.
Yeah. It that's a whole other podcast episode on, or multiple series on onboarding and training and
Hmm.
development of not just humans but leaders throughout the organization. Uh,
Yep.
it's shocking what passes for onboarding and leadership development throughout a lot of companies. Oh, we do a one-off
Hmm.
seminar. We're going to just here's a binder. Go take it and learn.
And you'll have no accountability, no mentor, no follow up, but we wonder why like that week long training didn't stick.
Yeah, and why people get disengaged and you know are especially I've seen people as Gen Z digital natives. And then someone will hand them like a 3 ring binder and say, "Go read this." And
And they're like, can this be digital? Like, does this need to be this way?
yeah,
And then someone that's an older generation is going to be like, how dare you ask that question?
yeah,
And then Gen Z's like, okay, so I guess I can't trust you because I just asked a question.
yeah, and then that just starts to create a wide range of rifts that continue, and when communication doesn't come in, those problems don't get solved. So let's if we can back up a little bit. One of the things I was thinking about is that how these generations do get created. We talked about the life phases and
Mhm.
the experiences that they have in each life phase. What other things are involved in creating these generational differences? Yep.
Yeah, so that is where we look at the cohort effect, which if you grab our new book, the first chapter of that is all about like my personal nerdy favorite part of generational theory is the theory part of it. But when we're looking at generations, a lot of time we're looking at what we call a cohort effect. So again, what's happening between those years when a group of people is going through those formative years of teen, young adulthood, just developing a brain that is your own and navigating the world. And we look at societal contexts that occur in that time period. So generally, we've got a generation is roughly about 15 to 20-year time period of people that are born around that same time period. And we look at the different events or trends or movements that are occurring in society that is going to be an interchange or an interplay in shaping how people navigate the world. And so for a generation, we're going to look at things like what's going on technologically, what's going on from a social perspective, like the key social topics of the time and how people are connecting. We'll also look at economically what's going on. So what's going on in the workforce, how people spend their money, how people invest their money, what they spend their money on. And then we also look at what's going on politically and geopolitically that will shape the way that people interact. And those four contexts, as we call them, they don't sit in silos because we are in a very interconnected society. And so we know that technology, especially today's technology, can drive communication and how we build relationships. It can drive how politics is done. It drives economy. The economy impacts how we build relationships. The economy impacts politics. And so there's a lot of overlap there. So we can't cleanly like put every little event that happens into its pretty little bucket. But we can do a good job of identifying what are some of the key contexts within each cohort that shape how they see the world, how they are motivated, how they navigate the world. And I really like a good one that we can use because it's not really disparaging to anyone. But baby boomers, again, born after 19, or they were born after World War II. And so they were growing up in a time that was like peace, prosperity, growth, economic development, trust in institutions, growth in media, but at a very, I would say, approachable pace of change. But like a high level of loyalty to their communities, high level of loyalty to their countries, high level loyalty to institutions and companies. And that really comes from the fact that the years that they were growing up for about 15 to 20 years were really, really pleasant. There was lots of jobs. They were able to access higher education. They were able to buy a house under $100,000. They were able to feed a family of three or four pretty reasonably and amass wealth. They grew, and that's not their fault. We don't fault that generation, but what was going on in their formative years really shaped how they grew up to be adults and how they are today. Like, I think our lifers, the concept of lifers in a company or on a team is probably going to die with baby boomers. It's just not how the world is structured, but they are continuing to progress their time in the world with that mindset of like, I'm gonna stick around, I'm having it, things are good, nothing problem here. So it's really those formative years when we think about as the generations growing up and how they're learning how to interact with each other, themselves, and the rest of the world. The key events that are going on is shaping young people at that time. And so you can think about another example would be people people like 9/11 happened and that impacted all of us. Yes, it did. It impacted just about everybody in North America in a very distinct way. It impacted people across the country. But if you were 45 when that happened, you can have a reaction to that, but be like, I have a little bit of understanding of my sense of safety. Like I can be worried, but I know how to like manage this. If you are a 17-year-old about to graduate and go into college or potentially be enlisted into the military at that time, very different experience for millennials at that time because we're also developing our sense of safety and how to interact with others. And so when you have a war, that tends to shape young people's sense of perspective on safety as well as their interactions with government.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in that.
I know it's wild. It's people are like, your job is, I'm like, I'm a historian, but also I have to be really good at pop culture and knowing what's going on with the kids. And I need to know how the economy works and how politics works and technology and those things. And they're like, isn't that exhausting? I'm like, no, I love it. I get to study people and how we interact with each other.
step into the corporate structure at that point, what does that mean from a leadership standpoint?
Hmm. That's a great. So when we think about companies and teams, the world has happened to different cohorts. Like we can't change that. When people are like, back in my day, I'm like, it was your day. The day has changed, right? Like we can't change that. We can recognize that the difference of what shaped each generation and how our values might be different because of that. So I'll go back to like some of the elements of like motivation to work and what people want out of work and why they might want to work. Where we see generational nuance is it's really driven by some of the social and economic factors during the formative years that each generation's growing up. So we look at baby boomers, just the idea of stability was really present. The idea of prosperity was a really big deal to them. So loyalty, prosperity is really big in shaping how they were coming into the workplace. For Gen X, it's this idea of they were growing up in a time where they just had a lot more autonomy and flexibility because when they were growing up, they were the first generation of predominantly households where they would have two parents working. So they were taking care of themselves in the afternoon when they got home from school. And so they can handle it, they can handle their own lives. And so they were taking that piece into the workplace and saying, I'm autonomous, I'm independent, I can do what I want. Millennials we see come into they were growing up at a time with like innovation all around us, like let's be better, let's create something new, let's invent something with this crazy thing called the internet. And so they come into spaces and they're like, could we improve this somehow, could we make this better, can we collaborate to make something amazing? And then we see Gen Z grow up in a time where they're very informed, they have a lot of information about a lot of things, and so they see it as I'm very informed on what could be wrong and how my work might actually create positive change for others and social good for others. And so the why people work, it gets into these nuanced areas because of the world that they were more or less teenagers and young adults in and how they might want to make their money. And we see kind of this push more towards, I would say, like mission driven work, purpose driven work, social output work with younger generations. Because I think as a society, we figured out like, here, give people a job, pay them a paycheck, have them do their work, and then great, we've checked that off, and we're building on top of that with each younger generation. And so when they come in and say, I want to innovate, or I want to change the world, I want to make things better for other people, they want to build on top of the baseline of what is already occurring of having a good job, getting a good paycheck, but they want to be good people as well. And so it's really going back to each generational cohort, the world, and how work was positioned to them from an identity perspective and what they could get out of it is very tightly connected to what's going on socially and economically.
Yeah, and I think it was Deloitte this year, a survey they did showing the Gen Z and millennials are chasing what they call the trifecta of money, meaning, and well-being.
Mhm.
And we're seeing that a lot in what you said in the Gen Z and millennials. But how are you seeing that impacting Gen X and the Boomers?
They're kind of like, we didn't have that, so why do you need it? Like, toughen up and deal with it. Which, again, like, I never really fault anyone that's advocating for the well being of themselves or others. And maybe I am being biased towards my own generation and younger generations, but if there's people saying, like, I'm going to be a better worker if I have wellness integrated into my life, I just feel like we can't fault them for that. And I think that we got to pull away some of the things weren't like that when I was your age. So you just need to deal with it and toughen up. And I'm like, I'm sorry, have we not grown as a society and gathered new information and evolved our ways? Just because it was harder for you doesn't mean it needs to be harder for everyone else. I call that societal hazing, and I don't really think that it's productive for anyone.
Agreed, agreed. And again, from my background, I've seen it both sides. There are some people that are like just upset that Gen Z and millennials are asking for this, and maybe it's because they're like, well, I didn't get that, and no one else should get it, or I'm pissed off that I didn't ask for it. But on the flip side, I'm also seeing, particularly Gen X, but some boomers as well, that are being like, oh, there is another way.
Mhm.
And that's reminding me that, hmm, I can take something from this. I can learn this, and I can, even if I am in my 50s and 60s, I can make a change to better my current circumstances, my working environment. I don't have to be the one, you know, driving my nose into the ground every day, or nose to the grindstone, as the saying goes,
Mhm.
every day. I can look at my well-being and find more meaning
Mhm.
in what I'm doing.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, and I think that one, those people, regardless of generation, are always like they need to be protected, like put in a little bubble and been like, yes, good job. We appreciate your open-mindedness. I think a little bit of that comes from the idea that just because we've done something this way all the time doesn't mean we always have to do it that way, right? There's a kind of like that mindset is laden with ego. I recently interviewed Amanda Littman for my own podcast, and she has a new book out called "When We're in Charge," and it talks about younger styles of leadership, shifting away from the mindset of ego and focusing more on legacy and creating systems and processes that will outlive the leader. Because you should be able to take a leader out of the environment because all of the people have been kind of like leader proofed into being able to operate effectively together. And I think that for older generations, they've been in that space for a really long time that it's like, why would we ever change it if it's working? And there's a sense of loss when we change things or we're expected to change things. And that's not everyone says that, but I think that people in older generations that are willing to say, I'm 60, I'm willing to learn something new to get better at my job. And it might be better at my job or it might be better for myself. But that takes a willingness to step into a vulnerable space and set the ego aside that you don't have to know everything.
Mhm. And yeah, that's it's the growth mindset,
Yeah.
and being able to embrace the process of change and understand that that's just part of life. While it is
Mhm.
happening faster and it may be more challenging to adapt to if you're not used to that as much, yeah, people with that growth mindset, regardless of age, are are able to adapt and thrive. And
Mhm.
this is more and more important. I'm going to get the exact numbers wrong, but you know, in the past we talked about people being in a job or a role for their entire career, decades at a time, and this was probably 5 to 10 years ago, a stats that I heard, but it was something like changing jobs every 2 to 3 years and careers every 5 to 10. And I think that's even accelerated more quickly now with AI disruption and all the different trends that are happening. What are you seeing in terms of the mindset around both employees and leaders in managing this change?
Leaders don't like it because it's hard to hire new people. Good leaders will say, if this is no longer a good fit for you, let me help you get your next opportunity. Again, those are people that need to be protected and loved on. I think that there's some element of truth that we are changing jobs faster. We're moving from position to position faster. I think we have to be really careful of controlling that for age. So the Center or the Bureau for Labor Statistics in the US, they released data, I think it was like 2 years ago. We talk about it in our book of like baby boomers job hopped at the same rate that millennials and Gen Z did when they were the same age. And some of it is what I call trying on different hats in your 20s.
Yeah.
You're just trying on different hats. And we don't factor into the fact that like people that want to start their own businesses most of the time are doing that in their 30s and their 40s after they've been around a little bit longer. And so I think that some of the like people hop around too much. Nobody wants to work. It's so hard to find talent. I just believe that we have to own up and we have to take the onus for some of the stuff. And we have to be like, well, are we creating systems? Are we creating a reputation around here or a culture around here that makes it hard for people to want to stay here or would make them hesitant to join our team? And we always want to deflect it out and be like, okay, it couldn't be us. Like it couldn't be us. It's just people want to be lazy. They don't want to work. And I'm like, I think that's actually like not true. I just, maybe they don't want to work for you.
I love that. Yes, and that's a coaching conversation that gets happens a lot. Is clients will come in and they're like, "Oh, so and so is so lazy, and they're my team, and this," and I'm like, "When was the last time you looked in the mirror and held up like the mirror to you? What are you
Hmm.
doing? What is your role in this, and how can you
Hmm.
change it?"
Hmm. Yeah, I think that it's some of this like people don't want to work stuff is like I don't think it's necessarily generationally specific. We talked about the rate of change of society. The workplace is changing rapidly. It's I, it's organizations that know how to navigate ambiguity and know how to navigate change will be the ones that continue to be places that people want to work because they will feel safe and they will feel like they belong and they will feel like they can do meaningful work even with chaos around them in the world because that does that. I mean, it just feels like we're living in a constant chaos cycle. And if you have a workplace that is affirming, is that cares about you, that is a place where you feel connected to other people, that's a place of solace that you don't want to leave. If our if our environments as leaders and organizations and companies create additional chaos for our employees, like no wonder they'd want to leave. People are just not hardwired to deal with chaos on a regular basis unless you opt to work in emergency services like a firefighter or EMS. Like and that takes a very special person. Most people don't want to live in a chaos state all the time.
Well, and even that, like certain aspects of the role are chaos, but then other parts are very organized and structured, and that balances it. Uh,
Hmm.
but yeah, I often say to leaders, I've yet to meet a human that doesn't want to be in a team or a role where they're doing stuff they love, they're making a difference, they're recognized for making that difference, they enjoy the people around them, and they have a great, inspiring leader.
Hmm. And that's like, as someone that studies generations, that's what people want, regardless of if they're 22, just got out of college, first big kid job, first big kid paycheck, or they're 65 planning for retirement.
Yeah.
People want that. And that's really hard to accept that, like, as a leader, we have to hold the responsibility for the impact of that we make on the environments of the people that we're leading. And if we don't, then we really just need to set the ego aside and say, like, this isn't about me. This is about creating something bigger. And I mean, like, people are like, oh, but not everything is like this altruistic company. I'm like, no, but like, if you're a company, you have some form of output. Someone is buying your services to some degree. That's how you're making money. So, yes, it is about creating something bigger. It's just the people that think that, oh, you just need to, shut up and do your job. I'm like, well, they will, but they're going to shut up and quietly apply for something else.
Yeah, and I think it's changing from what I've seen. That there's still a long way to go in that blending. And I always say my sphere of uh, influence is human performance, business strategy, and the leadership aspect. So being able to balance people and performance, human performance, but also business performance, because
Mhm.
every study out there shows that when humans are thriving, businesses thrive.
Yep.
Yet that connection is still not being made in the majority of companies.
Well, the unfortunate part of that is like sometimes people will read things like that, but they don't want to accept that as truth. They want to learn it the hard way. And I'm like, if fine, if you want to have an experiential learning activity with your own business about how all of the kind of like workplace research has been done might not apply to you and you want to be the outlier, by all means, run that experiment yourself on seeing if your high performing teams and your high performing people stick around, even if you create like a tyrant landscape of working.
I love your
We can
perspective of this. Let's prove that you can be the outlier.
do it. But again, I do stats. And so I'm like, please be my outlier, change the mean. Like, if you think that you can be the person that's going to step outside the bell curve, to keep it really nerdy, and you're going to be on the other tail end, and you're going to be that like less than 2% that make it, by all means, do it with your own business. I don't want to be a part of it.
Where where do you think Gen Alpha? How do you think Gen Alpha is going to come into this?
I can't, we can't confidently say. They're not old enough to take a survey themselves. Um, I think that we can always think, who's the closest in age to them. Gen Z. Many Gen Z are like, okay, you don't need to give me the instructional manual on that technology. You know how to do it. I think with Gen Alpha, again, this is all speculative because they're the oldest, are only like 13. We we being older generations need to be prepared for a generation that is so tech fluent to the point where we might not fully understand it. So like their tech abilities will probably just eclipse. I'm fully prepared that if I ever have a child, that I will be dumber than that kid, just because of the ability to be as smart as they are through technology. However, the trade off with that, and we know this from the way that little brains develop and young people develop, um, there's some serious consequences around social interaction. And I think that as we're moving into a world that is more integrated with technology, AI, the necessity for humans that know how to be humans is going to be at an all-time high. And so I think that if you're raising little ones right now that are in Gen Alpha, being really intentional of not only just being like, here's my iPad kid, but here's my iPad kid that can also hold a conversation, navigate interpersonal conversations, and be a good human. Because I do think we'll have a tech tipping point where everyone will use the technology and the performance indicators will start being about like who's a good human and who can interact with other humans.
I love to hear you say that. As someone who has two teenagers right now, I know that's something my wife and I talked about and had very strong personal beliefs about making sure our kids were not. I think we want obviously them to understand technology and be able to be fluent in it, but the
Mhm.
bigger, most important part was being high functioning humans.
Yes. And I think that you're doing them a lot of support in that because, and I'm not going to criticize people's parenting. Um, in my life of being a professional, the people skills are the hardest thing to teach others.
Yeah.
And it is, if we go back to like humans or fancy animals, the ones that can interact well with the pack tend to survive better. And I think that's so applicable to where we're headed as a society is the humans that can be good humans are going to help the pack survive.
To put a bow on what we've been talking about a little bit and work towards wrapping it up, how would you, I guess, what advice or tips would you provide to leaders that are leading multi-generational teams, and how can they as leaders and their teams thrive?
Yeah, so this is not a formal leadership theory. It's just kind of something that we made up and we talk about in our book is learning how to toggle as a leader. So being able to recognize like what is the universal kind of tenets of being a good leader. We talked about it: trust, psychological safety, making people feel like they belong, meaningful work. But being able to toggle between different cohorts and say, I recognize that you're different. Your difference is not a bad thing. And I'm willing to learn about your differences. And I think it's the willingness to learn and listen about why different generations have different perspectives is what is going to make, again, the humans that are good at being humans thrive in workplaces. And so it's this toggle leadership of knowing what I know and being open to learning what I don't know from the people I work with.
I love that. And while it's easy on the surface, putting it into
Mm-hmm.
practice is something that, from what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, takes daily practice and awareness, reflection, a desire to step outside your comfort zone to learn and grow.
Yeah. And I hope it's not too complicated, but for the people that are like, but how do I learn the things I don't know about these people? Really empathetic, active listening, like truly, which is a hard skill to learn, and then asking really respectful questions.
Well, thank you, Megan. This has
Thank you for
been
having me.
this has been outstanding. And where can people find your book, and where can they find you?
Yeah, so the book Generations in the World of Work came out earlier this year. It's available on Amazon. It's also available through our publisher, Routledge. We're not sure if it's hit public libraries yet, but I always like to take an opportunity to shout out public libraries to get your reading materials as well. They stay open when we keep them busy. So public library might also have it. If you're associated with a university, it might also be stocked with the university library. And then if people want to hang out with me, I'm really easily accessible on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, and I've got my website as well. But my website's changing, so I'm directing everybody to LinkedIn right now. I love that; it's a good place for connection, and I'm a big internet cheerleader, so I like to connect with people so I can cheer you on.
Fantastic. Well, I'll make sure those go in the show notes, and so people can link directly to you and your book. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom and expertise, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Thanks so much.
That wraps up another episode of the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, which guests or topics would you like to see featured on the show? Message me through LinkedIn or on the contact page of timborys.com with your ideas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tim Borys with Fresh Wellness Group, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.